Content warning. This podcast episode contains discussions of a sensitive nature that may be triggering for some individuals.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's go. Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast in partnership with Kidney Care UK, sharing faith, knowledge, hope, and love.
Hi, and welcome to Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast. My name is Dee Moore, and I am a kidney warrior. This podcast is dedicated to encourage, educate, and inspire as we explore all aspects of kidney disease, related chronic illnesses, and health. If you have any questions or ideas for topics you would like me to cover, please get in contact with me on social media using the handle Diary of a Kidney Warrior. In today's episode, I am bringing you a kidney warrior story. Now, there's always something you can learn from someone's story, something that can bring inspiration and hope. My guest today from Sydney, Australia, is strategist Carl Jurassic. In this episode, Carl takes us through his powerful journey facing a CKD diagnosis as a teenager, navigating the physical and emotional challenges, and finding resilience along the way. Carl's story is one of strength, determination, and advocacy. Carl discusses his outlook on life and the lessons he has learned along his kidney warrior journey. Hi, and welcome to Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast. How are you doing today, Carl?
Very well, thanks, Dee.
Welcome to the podcast. Again, I'm going to say, everyone knows what I'm going to say, that I'm so excited to record a Kidney Warrior story interview because, as everyone knows, it's so powerful to learn from someone's lived experience with CKD. So thank you so much for joining me.
Good to be here.
Right. Without further ado, I'm going to start with my first question. And my first question is, how did your kidney warrior journey begin and how were you diagnosed?
I came at it actually from a very left field place. So I was in high school. I was 15 and I had a bad flu. And then that evening, I remember having a particular rash. I remember exactly where I was sitting, and it was kind of in my inner thigh and on my ankles. And at the time in Australia, there was a lot of conversation about meningitis and to what to look out for in regards to the symptoms. And it was cold and flu symptoms and a rash that was not bumpy. So as in, like, when you get a rash, sometimes like an itchy bite, you have a bump that comes up. It was more like just red dots that had just kind of come to the top of the skin. So we went to the medical center. The medical center said, it's probably meningitis. I then had a heart attack almost, went straight to the guy's advice, never forgot, go straight to A&E and tell them you probably have meningitis. So I went to A&E, they saw me. I spent about a month in hospital. It wasn't meningitis. And because it was kind of a virus called vasculitis that was attacking my kidney, but because it was like an episode of House, like, you know, it was so rare that a lot of doctors had no idea what was going on. I was kind of in and out of hospital really for a month, losing a lot of weight. I went down to like 45 kilos. It wasn't until like a very, very well-known nephrologist saw me that was like symptoms A, B, C, D, get him on chemotherapy, get him on blood transfusion, get him on dialysis, plasma exchange, give him these drugs. And at that time, the way she explained it at 15 was like, it's like your kidneys have been punched really badly by an acute virus. You will have been punched, and then over the next 10 years, they'll probably decline slowly until you'll need a transplant.
I can really relate to being in hospital for such a long period, losing weight, them taking a long time to come up with a diagnosis is literally what happened to me as well. During that time, was there someone in the hospital that was giving you support? Was there anyone there to help you cope with what was happening to you?
Yeah, I think because I was still quite young, 15, this is like 23 years ago, that it was my mum there the whole time. And I think also family members wanted to consistently come see me. So everyone was kind of very worried. I remember like they did prayers at school for me in multiple schools because it was a very dark time where they didn't know if I was going to live or die because I couldn't figure out what it was. Yeah, so I remember being very well supported and just remember telling myself, just do what the doctors say and just shut up, because that was my approach of getting through that. But I also was very blurry because it was 23 years ago in regards to the actual hospital experience.
You were put on a high dose of prednisolone, which caused changes to your physical appearance, acne, etc. How long were you on prednisolone for? Did these after effects last a long time, or did they reduce the dose over a period of time and you get better results? How was your experience being on prednisolone and dealing with those after effects?
I think there should be some course or something that people should know before they start prednisone, because the first time you do it, you're just taking pills. You're not thinking. And then I remember looking in the mirror in the hospital when I was there and being like, your face looks a bit different. It's a bit puffier around the sides. And then it started to get, and it changes slowly. You don't really notice it a lot. But then I really started to notice it. And then people were commenting and then people stare. And then it's very self-conscious, especially in the period when you're a teenager. And I remember actually, I used it as a bit of a superpower to study because I was actually more conscious. I remember waking up every morning because it was my kind of equivalent of A levels, or kind of in America SATs, like it was out called HSC in Australia. And I could focus so much on studying because I was so worried about my appearance. And I'd wake up every morning and look in the mirror to see if my acne had gone down or if my face had gone down. And still remember to this day, people staring a lot. And then at our formal, which is like a thing we do, like prom in Australia, it wasn't until that point, because I was in my final year, that people would open up and talk to me about it, being like, I remember this one guy sitting me down being like, what happened to your face, man? And I was like, whoa, I wasn't ready for that. And because they were drinking a little bit and obviously they were a bit more comfortable opening up a bit. And I was like, oh, it's just my medication that I'm on. But it's difficult to explain to someone that doesn't know about it. And I think I was eating probably not as best as I could, because there are ways to reduce that with less salt. Didn't know that. So I was probably eating not the best, but it still impacts me today, probably because I have to take prednisone all the time, but as in like, it impacted me a lot psychologically, because it took started when I was 15, 16, right? And then finished school when I was 17. It wasn't until I was 18, 19, till I know that there was no effects by looking at pictures. But because I was on such a high dosage, it took at least a year and a half till I finished to get back to what I was before. So it was a long period.
What advice do you have for somebody, especially a young person who is facing these challenges in terms of how their body has changed and their appearance has changed due to prednisolone or steroid treatment?
I would definitely never not take the drugs, because like my whole approach in facing death for the first time, I was like, the reason why you got out of this is because you listened to the doctors and you just did exactly what they said. So as in, don't try and take it into your own power, because you're going to kill yourself or hurt yourself worse. That's the first main bit of advice, because there's obviously an appetite to maybe go, what if I just have one every 2 days? What if I just have less? Because you know that drug is directly doing that impact. So don't do that, because it's silly. But there are ways to not have as much of an impact, definitely, from doing proper research nowadays. And like things like salt will increase massively the amount of water retention that you have in your body. So changing your diet accordingly, it's almost like zero salt, lots of veggies, lots of fruit. That's a way, and exercising a lot. Like you can't control it, but you can reduce it a lot. So I think definitely doing as much as you can to counter it, and being on top of that is my advice.
So how was life now as a kidney patient and a young person?
I think it was a really good period of my time after the effects of prednisone had worn off. It was very interesting as well because I specifically remember being about 18, 19, a year or so after the treatment of prednisone, when I was just on, I think, a blood pressure tablet. Like for that point on, I knew the advice from my nephrologist was my kidneys were declining slowly, very slowly, like all other people kind of pre-transplant or dialysis. So I think it was a very good period of time because I remember people specifically consistently saying, "Are you okay?" Because it looked like I was becoming very thin. So again, that PTSD of taking a lot of prednisone, people going, "Are you okay? You seem like you've lost a lot of weight," because they might have met me in that year or two and my face was going back to what it used to look like. So that was playing up on me a little bit, but it was making me feel more confident because people would say, "Oh, you look a lot better. You look very well." Like I remember really nice compliments from people on me feeling like my previous self. So that period of time for me was very positive. It's obviously very young, exploring many different things. And that was probably from age 18, 19, all the way up to 25. Really, that period of time was just checking in with my nephrologist every 6 months, keeping track of my CKD. And I wasn't really thinking about my kidney disease at all, except I was thinking, I know I'm going to need a transplant eventually.
So during this period where they spoke about the potential decline in your kidney function, were they discussing with you about dialysis or was the focus on straight to transplant?
It was always going to be a transplant because at the time when I first got sick, my dad at the time was always like, "I'll give you a kidney straight away." So it was almost predetermined that my dad would give me a kidney when I needed it. And that was a big relief off my chest because asking is challenging. So preemptive transplant was always the option ahead of time I had dialysis when I was 15, but I didn't need it again that entire period of time. The one thing I was a little bit disappointed about, and I understand the nephrologist tells me why they take this approach with young people, is she didn't want to make too many lifestyle changes to myself because she knows already how hard it is for young people to make those lifestyle changes. They want them to enjoy their youth. So I wasn't really told anything about the stuff that I know now about how important diet is. So I was definitely eating all the things you shouldn't eat as a CKD3, CKD4 patient. I didn't even know what CKD3, CKD4 was. You're kind of just plodding along until I needed the transplant. And that annoys me a little bit because knowing stuff that I do now as an older patient, I was like, maybe I could have stretched that transplant out 10 more years. Maybe I could have not needed a transplant until I was 35. So that was the disappointment during that period of time, is not being an engaged patient, like not really understanding my condition, just knowing you need a transplant, your dad's going to give you one, party until you, as much as you want to, and eat what you want because you're in your 20s. And that's kind of what I did pretty much.
It always disappoints me that there isn't this prevention is better than cure when it comes to some doctors. It's like, I'll never understand why it isn't the priority to educate, inform, so that you can prevent going through these things. I just can never get my head around that. That is really difficult, knowing that diet could, but then at the same time, we'll never know what a difference it could have made. But at the same time,
I think it's just in the too hard basket for them. They're seeing patients every 15 minutes. Throwing pills at the situation is the way that it works, because they know that, like, if patient takes X, this happens. But behavior change, especially for most of the people coming into the disease being diabetes, overweight, high blood pressure, they probably already have a lot of bad habits, and kind of, it's a generalization, but it's a probable truth on the majority of things. So pills is a more effective way, I think, of slowing things down, or in many cases, just keeping, the floods from kind of caving in. But I agree. I mean, like, there's a lot of patients out there that really want the information and don't know it until it's too late.
So looking back now, and if you were talking to your younger self, or for a young person out there who's listening to this podcast episode, what advice would you give to them?
I would just learn what everything means, because there's different stages, and different stages means different things. Young people tend to eat poorly because metabolism is just not really a thing until sometimes you're in your late 20s. You can eat macas a couple times a week because your metabolism shows. Like, I can't do that now, but those every time you're having a very salty dish, it's just another punch on the kidney. And I didn't know that. And my favorite food, I remember my mom used to buy them, was olives, pickles, like pizza, all the things that are very high salty. I used to eat them just like in the truckload. So I don't know if that has an effect or not an effect on my journey, but you don't have to go also like overboard in eating just like perfect diet and being like, Mr. Perfect. It's just amending a few things or being conscious of a few things, and living a healthier life will make a massive difference. And your future self will thank your younger self for kind of doing that. It doesn't mean restricting fun or restricting things on doing anything. It's just more being conscious of what goes in your mouth that your kidney has to kind of sort. That's just the reality. And everyone's different. Like, there's millions of patients around the world with CKD. Everyone's got a different journey. You need to figure out and educate yourself on your journey and your bloods and how to figure out what to eat for yourself to slow that down.
So you went on to have a kidney transplant. How did that come about?
So it was a bit of I had kind of had this preemptive view. It's fine. My dad's giving it to me. It's all good. And then the month before the transplant, the doctor that was seeing my dad blocked it because he said that it was too much of a risk for my dad because he was a smoker till he was about 40, and that he had a potential clog in one of his arteries that something might happen during the transplant. I remember the feeling of just being like, I'm going to die. What's going to happen now? Do I ask my mom? Like, how do you ask someone for an organ? It's like impossible. Like, you can't ask someone for in my head. How do you do that? So luckily enough, we got a second opinion, and the second opinion of the doctor was like, you have just as much of a chance of getting hit by a bus than dying of the thing that other doctor said. So that was a relief because it was fine. My dad's still around. He's 78 now. Like, there's no issues. Like, and so that was a relief. I remember it actually being very positive. Like, I don't remember being in any pain at all. I remember going into the surgery and feeling bad for my mum because my dad went under and then I went under. So there was probably a period of time where both her husband and her son were in surgery. So I felt bad for my mum. And then I came out, and my dad actually came to visit me, I think the next day, and he was all good. I was all good. I was back at work within, I think, a month. And it made me really relook at life. You get a second chance. I think everyone kind of goes through that, you get an epiphany. But I literally quit my job and then moved to London within 2 months of the transplant. So to my mother's dismay, I kind of just said, I've always wanted to move to Europe. I traveled there quite a lot as a younger person and was like not too happy at my role. I was kind of a consultant strategist. I wanted to do something more creative. So I went to be a strategist in marketing and advertising in London. And, you get that lease of life. I jumped through the hoop, and I still think it's the best decision I've ever made. Risky decision, best decision I've ever made. But also that first specifically 5 years in London, from post-transplant to living in a new city, really pursuing a dream, doing all those things, was like that feeling of epiphany, really, like you're kind of doing what you want to do.
I always ask the question, how was life after receiving a transplant? But straight away, you did something that very few people do in their lifetime, and that's move to the other side of the world and have these new experiences and new challenges and new job, new everything. So straight away, you've answered that question in terms of what it gave you the opportunity to do. But on a day-to-day level, What did having that new kidney do for you?
I think it made me feel like I have a superpower. I kind of look at it like that. Like I'm different from everyone, but lucky as well. And also a little bit invincible. I think sometimes maybe too invincible because I'm like, I can't die. I've just literally been given my dad's organ who's inside me to live, and that's happening. So I took it to the next level, really, and I went to Africa to do some charity work in the middle of Uganda without any vaccine. So maybe I went a bit too far because as a transplant patient, you can't have yellow fever vaccine. And maybe too far as in I continued to party a little bit, probably too much, arriving in London with that invincible attitude. And I think meeting my now wife was a good thing, like during my first company that I went to in the UK, in just turning it down a little bit. Because again, just not being as crazy as I was. But I don't kind of regret any of that either because I was really enjoying myself and kind of living life to the maximum level I could.
So in terms of your renal care in Australia versus your renal care in England, was there a difference between the approach in each country? Was it the same?
Yeah, 100%. So massive difference. So the difference in Australia versus UK is they're both free, which is fantastic. We're very lucky to have just everything's free. But in Australia, I had my nephrologist that I had since I was 15. The same lady that figured out when I was dying, it's this problem. So she's my nephrologist now that I live back in Australia, but she's amazing. Like I can't explain. This woman is like superwoman in my eyes. And I didn't have her. She put her neck out to find a good hospital for me. She sent me to Guy's and Tommy's, and a particular professor that she liked, that she knew. So I had a sense of trust. But he soon retired after I moved. So then I was just pinged around like I felt in the NHS that I was just a number. And I couldn't, with my previous doctor, I had a one-on-one relationship with her, and I'm not a needy patient. If I was urgent, I would message her. I would email her. I'm very worried about this. Something's happened. She would email back straight away, and she'd message back straight away. And maybe because I wasn't a needy patient that it was okay, that she shared, but I didn't have that in the NHS. And it was like, it felt I was rushed a lot of the time and not cared for. And one example of that was, two really big examples of that was, once I offered to be on a study for transplant patients because they were doing a study, and he bumped up my prednisone, and I got that PTSD from prednisone. He wanted to bump up my prednisone, wanted to bump up a few different drugs to see the effect that it had. And I was like, oh, okay, it's for the study. I know that transplant patients are rare. And it ended up screwing up my creatinine. And then I'm like, look, I don't want to do this study anymore. Like, and it's almost like I was a lab rat for the study. That was one thing that really annoyed me. And then the second time was I ate some bad food somewhere, and I got this thing called cryptosporidium, which is kind of like gastritis, but a really bad gastritis. And I was like really sick, probably the most sick I've ever been. Just couldn't eat anything, couldn't have anything. And being dehydrated is the worst thing for a transplant patient. It felt like in the NHS, they didn't want to help me. Like they didn't want to come into hospital for a few days and just will monitor you. Like they would just like drink some water and see how it goes. They didn't want to put the effort in to make me feel not sick. And I'm very chilled patient. Like I'm not going to get angry at a doctor because it's their job. My wife ended up getting angry at saying, please just give him a line or something like that because he can't keep the water down. And I was losing a lot. I think I lost like 10 kilos. And I just was like, she's like, please, like he's losing weight here. And then when I had the drip in, I was able to feel a bit better and then start eating again. But she really had to push for just a minimum level of care. And that was the difference I felt between Australia and the UK, was much more preventative here. Even when I moved back from the UK, like I had 5 different tests of things that doctors picked up. They're like, oh, you've got this. Like in the UK, nothing was preventative. It was very reactive, and big difference. Also, though, the UK, I would say, is better from a sharing information point of view. In Australia, they keep everything behind the doctor's counter. You kind of just turn up and they tell you you're good. Whereas in the UK, I really liked how you could have patient view and see my results. And I understood myself a little bit more in the UK than I did in Australia in what my bloods meant and having the app to look at that. But yeah, they both could learn from each other. I think there's a lot of learnings to do across the board.
So we've talked about the many benefits of transplantation and what a difference it made to your life. Was there anything that you were concerned about as a young person growing up with CKD?
Yeah, definitely. There's a couple of big things. The first one was impotence. So when I was 15, and originally I'd had a lot of heavy treatment when I was really sick. So blood transfusion, dialysis, plasma exchange, chemotherapy. And I was really worried at that point because I did take a sample of semen for the future in case that was the case. And that's what stuck in my head. I'm like, why would they ask me to take a sample? I'm like, oh, maybe because I'm going to become impotent. So when me and my wife started trying for a baby a few years ago, I was really worried about that and kind of telling that to my wife and kind of thinking about those things. But when I did the tests, it was all good. So as in like the fear was there for 20 years or so, but when I did the tests, it was fine. So that was kind of one thing I was really worried about. Maybe a bit specific to myself versus other people. The one that's relevant to a lot of people is like, when will I die? I mean, we all have to face that question anyway. And death is one of those themes that we all kind of usually shy away from because we're all so nervous about it. We all need to kind of go through it and we hate to face it. But I think I never Googled how long does a transplant last because I didn't want to know. So like now that I know, is the answer you don't know. So as in like there's some people where it lasts 50 years and it's still going, and some people that last 50 minutes. So it's really a lottery, and it's really about how well you take care of the transplant. So that was one thing I was fearful of until maybe a few years after the transplant that I checked that out. And that obviously then affects, how can I be a good dad? How can I be a good husband, knowing that potentially your life is cut short? And, that's a fear that I will always live, and it's kind of like the only way you can counter that is be the best version of yourself at home. And also kind of with your body and your health, kind of you're in control of that yourself. And I really have only gone through that journey in the last kind of 5-ish years, definitely kind of post being married, now kind of recently becoming a father, really being on the back of my head, like, what's your plan, Carl? Like, are you doing the best version of yourself for those guys? Because it's not just about you anymore. It's about other people that you're going to impact.
So for someone listening who is concerned about their fertility, who wants to start a family, what advice do you have for them?
You need to think about many different things, but I wouldn't discount it unless it was a very grim circumstance. Like I would definitely go for it. But again, taking into account your family, your situation, I think a lot of younger people would be thinking, so this is not going to be a 55-year-old going, should I have kids? It's going to be like someone that's between, 20 and 40 going, is this right for me? With the treatments available now around the world, like you would be very hard not to do that, I feel, because it's a amazing experience. It's a life-changing experience, and you shouldn't let the disease get in the way of something that's special. And what you can do to help make sure that you're giving it your best is being good to yourself. So as in like making sure you're exercising, making sure you're eating well, making sure you're keeping your kidney as good as it can be, taking your pills every day, etc. And then, go for it. But as in like, just, I think also be very transparent with your doctors. So for example, I was very transparent and my nephrologist was like, okay, let's switch out one of your pills, which was my Fortec, one of the mycophenolate pills you take as a transplant patient, because there was a study that was saying, oh, that medication might impact the deformities in a child. So I stopped that one and replaced it with a different one 3 months before we started trying. So it's a good example of like, be honest with yourself, be honest with your family, and then be honest with your professionals, because they will help you get there. But definitely go for it.
So how is life now as a new dad?
It's very tiring, but also very rewarding. I think me and my wife have treated our dog, who's almost 9, like a baby for such a long period of time. So now we've got a balance in the house of like a real baby and a dog baby. And it's tiring, but I think as a male, it's very different because you're almost meeting someone for the first time and building a relationship. And I kind of messaged my wife this morning as in like, my love is increasing over time now because it's not at the same level probably as her, because she carried her and she feeds her literally from her body. So it's, I think, like really interesting now, the amount of love I'm feeling that she's interacting more because she's 5 months old, in, smiling, recognizing me, like playing a little bit. That feels, now I feel much more connected to her than I did a few months ago. But it changes your entire life in regards to what you can do on a day-to-day basis, how much you can output. It's about, conserving your energy and being as, taking sleeps when you can, but it's definitely rewarding.
So it's now 13 years since you've had your kidney transplant. How is your kidney doing now?
It was always my creatinine never was below 180. So kind of from day one of the new kidney, it was 180 was the lowest it ever got, maybe 170. But over time, over the 13 years, it's gone from 170 to now 280. And that's a bit of a jump because it was very stable between 170 and 200 for about 8-9 years. So you never know exactly when it's going to drop to the need for a transplant. But my wife has kind of already offered preemptively in advance to give a kidney. And now we're in a situation where we need to think very quickly about having a second baby before I need to go through a transplant from my wife, because then she will have one kidney, and it's not recommended to have a baby with one kidney because it's possible, but it's a lot of stress on the kidney, and then she might be impacted and then needs a transplant in 10, 15 years. So we're at a kind of crossroads now where we're planning for a second, and, do we do it? Do we not do it? When do we do it? Because at 280, it's unknown whether the kidney will last, 6 months, 1 year, or another 5 years. It's just a really tricky place. I just recently started on a new drug trial for, I forget the name of the drug, but it basically, it's been tested with CKD4, CKD3 to increase longevity of that. So they're doing a trial now for transplant patients. And my hope is that I can get the extra few years on the current kidney. I also recently did a kidney biopsy because the doctors were worried of the drop from, 200, 250 to 280. And there's nothing wrong with the kidney. It's all fine. It's just that my dad's 78. So it's a 78-year-old man's kidney inside a 38-year-old man's body. So naturally what's happening is it's just declining naturally. So good thing is there's no rejection. Bad thing is it's 78. So reality is I need a transplant in my head, and I'm kind of starting to just confront that to know that it's going to happen. And I'm playing like, in my own mind, it's okay. You're going to need to get one. You don't have to go ask for anyone for one because your wife's already offered, and we'll see kind of where that goes. And then hopefully in my head, maybe we have another baby in the next year or two, and then we don't have to do that transplant for another 2 or 3 years. But I really don't know where it's going to go, honestly, over the next, 1 to 5 years where I'll land. And I think that's one of the trickiest parts of being a kidney patient is, where is a kidney coming from? It's a very polarized topic in anyone's mind to ask anyone for an organ. It's a super weird discussion. I don't feel comfortable asking anyone. So I guess if it didn't work out with my wife's kidney, or it was incorrect, maybe we could they've got a thing in Australia where you do swapping. So like she donates to someone else and then I'm in a line first up for something else. Potentially maybe she's not right at all, or it doesn't work out with her one. So I'll just need to go to dialysis then, and then go on the lists and wait. But being, young-ish, I think I'll hopefully be okay to be on dialysis for a period of time to then get a kidney. But these are all things that I'm now thinking about in my head to make myself feel more comfortable for when it does happen, because I know it's going to happen. So it's like just being honest with yourself and not trying to avoid the topic so it doesn't become too stressful.
Managing uncertainty, the uncertainty of not knowing what's going to happen next, is very difficult. And you have a really positive outlook in terms of how you're managing that uncertainty. For anyone listening who is struggling with managing the uncertainty of not knowing if their transplanted kidney is going to fail, or they're on the transplant list and don't know when a kidney is going to be assigned to them, what is your advice to them for managing uncertainty?
Being a male, what I do is I just ignore it. But I know mental health is one of those things that like everyone's has their different approach, and some people have anxiety or depression that obviously you can't control. So as in like it's a sliding scale for different people. And I can only see it from my point of view. I go through that same problem that we all deal with, which is like the lottery of your blood test. You kind of go in there hoping that everything's okay. You never know. I kind of deal with it like everyone else. I just think that I try and reward myself after a blood test with a coffee. That's my kind of what I give myself as a present for kind of doing the blood test and hoping that everything's okay. I have the same rituals with drinking a lot of water before the blood test to making sure that the levels are pretty good. But managing uncertainty, I just try and make as many plans as I can to make what I can control certain. So to that point, confronting the fear of knowing that you're going to have to go through the same thing, mitigating that for the future. So, making sure that you're in a secure job, you kind of maybe be transparent with your work to be like, I have this problem, so it's not a shock when it comes up. Have those tough conversations with the family so they know how you're feeling, because it's tough alone. And speak to other patients, because I didn't really speak to patients at all for the first 20 years of being a CKD patient. And that was tough because I didn't know anything. I didn't speak to any patients, but in the past few years, I've spoke to a lot of patients, and I've learned we're all going through kind of the same thing. So joining communities or listening to this podcast or just gives you a sense of, again, making the uncertain certain by knowing that a lot of people are going through the same thing. I think that will help people a lot, because I didn't. And that way where I dealt with that was shoving it down and not listening to those dark thoughts, kind of just being classic male. But yes, speaking up as much as possible will help with anyone.
I know that you're very active on social media. So for anyone who would like to follow you, what are your handles?
On X, it's just at Carl Juresic, and on Instagram, it's at Carl Juresic. So CarlJuresic, just my name. And those are probably the two accounts that I'm most active on.
And as always, I will put the link to Carl's social media in the description box. Today, you've shared your journey with CKD, from diagnosis to transplantation to being a father for the first time, and your plans for the future. What is your final word of encouragement for the listeners?
I think having CKD is like a superpower as opposed to a disability. I think it's an awesome thing, because we are very neglected in the medical community, where there's not much information out there on how to manage our disease. And I think we have a very special community where there's lots of people around in the same situation. So try and think of it not as a bad thing, but as a really, really good thing to kind of be the best version of yourself. I really tried to ignore a lot of the illness, especially in my younger years, be like, pretend I don't have it, don't tell anyone, to embracing it in my older years, in being honest about it, telling people straight up, yeah, I have a transplant or I have this. And it's made me feel more confident in not hiding something. So I try and see the glass half full every day and enjoy life to the max. And I can do that better by being open about my disease and connecting with the community of people around me that have a similar issue. So highly encourage that, and highly encourage to educate yourself as much as possible, because you are your own advocate. And if you don't do that, no one's going to do that for you. So you really need to help yourself by educating yourself.
Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing very personal things about your journey. I know that this will help so many people out there. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dee.
Thank you for listening to Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast. And don't forget that you can contact me on social media using the handle Diary of a Kidney Warrior. Please do subscribe to the podcast, and please do tell a friend. New episodes of this podcast are released every other Monday. Until next time, take care and choose to live.
Diary of a Kidney Warrior, sharing faith, knowledge, hope, and love.